I'm Robert Davis. I'm doing a weekly roundup on transport in the time of COVID-19. It's based on the original article here, which got a nice review from Professor Phil Goodwin, which I keep on going on about. And as a weekly update, although since online here, the last one was there, but since Brian and Steve are doing this wonderful thing of putting it on YouTube, I think I might slacken off every now and again. Anyway, so for today, question for everybody. What is Section 96 of the Road Traffic Act 1988? All right, it is that you should not drive with defective vision. Okay. That is your last Dominic Cummings moment of the day. It's quite serious that nobody has been saying anything about this in terms of road danger, and they should have been. Okay, so here's a nice graphic from Dave Walker, which Cycling UK put up. Decision time, back to the normal or fast track to the future? Dave Walker, great cartoonist. There's also, there is a very nice a very nice tweet from Peter Stewart yesterday showing people cycling in Parliament Square. Okay, so we had the announcement, a new golden age for cycling. How's it shaping up? Well, the Transport Secretary's announced a new all dual carriageway across the Pennines to bind the country together, costing about £1 billion. Well, that's not very good. We've got £500,000 50-quid vouchers for cyclists. We don't know how that's going to be delivered. It could make a difference. It's following on from the French, could be good. There's the long ago announced legal protection for cyclists and walkers, could be some form of driver liability, which we're expecting. Haven't heard any more about that. Okay, so my personal view of the situation is lots of hard campaigning been going on, quite a lot of supportive noises from various people in various situations. For example, Nick Cohen, good piece in Spectator on the need to remove cars from Soho. A lot of bigotry on Twitter, as you'd expect. But the main thing I notice is highway authorities like I think West Sussex have been using the delay in guidance on funding and the technical advice which we've been promised to do nothing. They're just saying, oh, well, we're waiting for the new transport note to come out, and we're waiting for how to bid for funds, so we're not going to do anything. On the other hand, there are quite a few who are trying, but they're hampered by sometimes excessive caution, perhaps about legal issues, and a lack of steer from central government by not having had the guidance and the funding coming through. And I also want to draw out some issues today that have always been there with regard to infrastructure as they've been coming up. So, first of all, in the UK generally, I'm afraid Birmingham, Bath and Manchester have put off the implementation of their clean air zones, supposedly because of the consultation that would be required and the general fuss. Birmingham, the Transport and Environment Cabinet member has written to Grant Shapps asking for having 20 miles an hour throughout his area of Birmingham. I don't know if the politicians have to do that, but anyway, he has. Leicester, we've looked at before. They're going to be putting in 1 mile of new walking and cycling lanes. I'm not quite sure what that means. Is it going to be a new cycle lane or some extra walking as well as part of that 1 mile? But 1 mile of it, whatever it is, every week for 10 weeks. Just being told that Plymouth has done nothing. Portsmouth is campaigning. Here's something came up. Salford in Greater Manchester This is Liverpool Road. I put a thing there about the dimensions, you know, how wide is it? Could it be wider perhaps, bearing in mind what this wide length is, what the width of this carriageway is? How long is it? You know, it's starting to get a bit kind of picky perhaps about what we're getting. You know, you may be glass half full, you may be glass half empty. My view is pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will. And so I'm going to be pointing out some things that I don't think are quite as good as they should be, or some potential problems. Liverpool, West Derby Road, 1 lane of general traffic taken out. This is Simon O'Brien did some tweets of him cycling up this interesting pop-up cycle lane here. Okay, so some campaigns. The key worker thing is still going on that we talked about last week. Mums for Lungs, worth going to. They have a template letter asking for road closures. Cycling UK have had 6,000 people, of whom I hope everybody watching today is one who's written to councils. That's quite good. That means every highway authority on average will have got about 100 letters at least. Cycling UK commissioned some research saying 36% of people questioned agreed that they could rethink their travel habits in the future to use cars and motor vehicles less. Okay, now going to focus a lot today on London. That's the comment that Mayor Khan made a couple of weeks ago, or no, sorry, just over a week ago. That's the stuff you have to look at. This is a new graphic about the greener future of London's busiest roads. And this is the street space for London. That's the logo to watch out for. So how are the boroughs in London going to be funded? That still isn't obvious, but the word is it's going to be first come, first served. That's what I hear. I may be wrong. I would very much like to have seen Will Norman or the mayor announce how they're going to do one cycle train for adults, properly distanced. There are plenty of cycle trains who'd like to do that. Nothing's come from that I'm aware of yet. Okay, Park Lane. This is TfL done this just after the broadcast or this session last week. Simon Still put up this graphic saying, well, the only amount of Park Lane that's been done is that bit. However, by Saturday, this had been going in, and not just temporary stuff, lots of concrete and curby type stuff. Due to be finished by today, going to have a bi-directional track, 1 general traffic lane only, that's very interesting, and 20-mile-an-hour limit on Park Lane. Okay, now Camden Borough, that's been showing willing, a lot of intention of doing good stuff. You can look at the Camden Cyclists website to see what's going on. Camden Cyclists, very keen campaigners, said I'd give them a mention. Here are the kind of thing, there's a filter going on here. This road, Sandal Road, it's already got these quite interesting cycle lanes, and it's now had a bollard, and I think it's just going to be the bollard there. Maybe not make that much difference. I use it a lot. It's not exactly the kind of road that puts people off through heavy traffic. It's a kind of showing willing. Also on Goods Way, round the back of King's Cross.
No, you're wrong. There's a major flow of traffic goes through Sandal Road in both directions all day. It's a big road.
Okay, my apologies.
Where the bollard is a width restriction, close to the top of the lorries going through. Now it's going to stop everything.
Okay, my apologies. Here's Goods Way. The advisory cycle lane, first of all, turned into a mandatory, and wands are on it. Now, what I like about that, if you can see it, I hope on your devices, is it's being put in, you know, not with more to follow the desired line of cyclists and a little bit wider. And that's something which I think is necessary. If possible, make those lanes wider. So that's Camden, and there again is another restriction. Someone said, well, you know, what about cargo bikes? I don't know if maybe these are new bollards, and they're going to be able to use cargo bikes. One must hope so. Okay, Hammersmith and Fulham. Very interesting tweet from Jeremy Vine with a video on the 22nd. And what he did is he started off his video with him going down the advisory cycle lane saying, oh, you know, putting in pop-up bike lane, great, but making it too narrow. It's great to start off with, and it goes back right onto the old advisory, which is not really wide enough. And what happens is that the guy he's following is going along and someone just noses out into the cycle lane. Before that went in, you could kind of go out a little bit further and avoid the van or anything coming out. Now it's more difficult. Vine says, let's put up some signs. I think there would be a need for some kind of engineering to get drivers to stop where they should do. How that happens, I don't know, maybe we can discuss that, but it's a kind of problem that you will get with cycle lanes. And here again, Hammersmith and Fulham in Hammersmith Road, King Street, the barriers have been put in a way which is kind of a bit too narrow. And my personal thing is, let's have it socially distanced so it's good and wide, you can overtake. Vine and others said, oh, I think it'll be changed once the council get round to it. One must hope so, but I'm personally not happy with that. There is some discussion about school streets going in for those schools that are opening. I think Camden are looking at that, and a couple of other councils, which I can't talk about at the moment. There is an issue in that they would possibly have to be staffed by school teachers, of whom there are few at the moment, going back into work. So we don't know what's going to happen. There may be a need for volunteers, whatever. So there's a query about those school streets. Here's something from Hounslow. They've done one bit of filtered permeability in Duke's Meadows. There's the link. What particularly interested me about Hounslow is that they're apparently going to take measures to stop people leaving the motorway at Heston Services and getting onto local roads. So bit of traffic management there, which would be welcome. Greenwich, the leader, did a few tweets saying, I'm not used to cycling, but I'm going to try out what's there. It's great stuff, and you know, generally talking stuff up. Haringey stuff seems to be maybe happening, but it's behind closed doors so far. Nobody really knows what's happening. And the Lancaster Road Living Streets group in Haringey did some tweets showing what a road closure has done. When I say road closure, I mean filtering, because people can walk and cycle still. But it's not part of the COVID measures. It's not because of the measures that are being taken. It's because of some other roadworks for gas mains or something which had already been planned. Kensington Chelsea, there seemed to be a pretty unhelpful scheme going around the houses instead of the segregated tracks on Bayswater Road, which were stopped and refused by Kensington Chelsea. So, you know, hopefully the kind of lots of money being spent on stuff which isn't good won't be happening. Let's see. Now, this is, for me, this is the most interesting slide of the lot. This is Royal Borough of Kingston. And essentially what's happening is that the footway is going to be extended to have the cycle lane over the bridge as part of it. And the cyclists will be going there, taking space from motor vehicles. Couple of points at the moment, or when this photo was taken a couple of days ago, just cones, that might not be enough. Also, the new signage which has to be used, it can get a bit cluttery. You know, I don't know any way around that, but since you're supposed to be giving more space for people to walk, you want to be careful about how these get in the way of people, particularly wheelchair users. Most interesting bit is this. Now, here, I think you see why they've made the decision to give the cyclists there all that extra room. This is now all for walking. This won't be an actual cycle lane. It's all for walking. That's where cyclists go. And my view is that this is because of this great big tree curbing here, which has to be there, originally put in for anti-terrorist reasons, whatever it was, 25 years ago, 20 years ago. And they thought, obviously, you've got to extend walking, so cyclists got to go somewhere. They're going to have to take this whole lane. So I think this could be the tree curbing effect, which is something which would be very welcome. Incidentally, Sadiq Khan, when he was talking about Waterloo and Westminster bridges, very properly talked about them being opened up, not closed. They're only closed for motor vehicles. They're going to be opened up. Okay, I've given Lambeth again. I know I did this last week, but they really seem to be the ones with a kind of borough-wide general initiative, which is better than anybody else in London. Merton, Lucy will tell you about some promising noises about reviving their mini Holland, but it's mainly footway widening in one part of town, no modal filters or bus gates or pop-up cycle lanes. Wandsworth, similarly, the council will carry out works next week to widen a pavement in Southfields and close a busy road in Balham. Incidentally, any of you who know a lot about the history of traffic management will know traffic management schemes, closing off a road to motor vehicles was the Balham scheme in the 1960s. You know, pretty limited stuff there. A lot of boroughs just kind of going through the motions. City of Westminster, one of the opposition councillors has come up with a map here on that link with top 20 schemes that people have been going on about. On Twitter, shall I just say mixed reception to this map. From some people saying good, some people saying not anything like good enough. Here's a photo from Waltham Forest, and it's interesting for me because with that flush curb, what you've got here is really the kind of thing we want to see. It's that kind of extended footway, genuinely extended, genuinely more space. So much of what I see is just odd bits and pieces outside the chip shop. Of course, it does raise the question of what's going to happen to cycling there. We don't know. So again, I've done another repeat of what LCC said in Simon's blog on the 14th. Any funding now coming from the Mayor and TfL will be likely to go to those boroughs getting on with the Mayor's Street Space for London approach. Okay, so that's the infrastructural stuff. Mentioning again, standing up to prejudice. Very interesting thread from Ash Sarkar. She's a, for those of you who don't know her, she's a Corbynite journalist, and as an adult woman, she decided to learn how to ride a bicycle, and she showed how she did it step by step. And it's quite inspiring, and one of the reasons why we should have on-road cycle training, confidence training available, along with standing up to prejudice. Again, I repeat that. There we go. What if it's just opportunism by cycling advocates and we create better cities for nothing? So that's, sorry about the Camden thing, shows how wrong you can be. I have missed out quite a few things. I think I've got quite a few things in. Any things you want to let me know about, do direct message me, and with photos and any links, and it'll go in the files at least. Okay, so I'll stop sharing, and here I am. Any questions?
Thanks, Bob. I think Jean and George wanted to come in just to thoroughly clarify the Camden situation. We need a bit of a...
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Yeah, yeah, Bob, I'm afraid you still have underreported what's happened in Camden. Last week, they installed four full bollarded closures of really irksome rat runs that have been discussed and objected to for many months or years, and they do make the roads pleasanter on the roads nearby to the closures and so on, reducing traffic dramatically. So we've got 4 new bollarded closures in
4 schemes with
5 closures and 4 schemes, which have an important impact. We've got the Goodsway track that you've reported, and we've got the Camden working hard on further plans for further similar actions. But the bollarded closures are proper closures. Those plastic barriers were nothing to do with that. There's no issue about box bikes or anything like that.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, okay. It's yeah, sorry about the confusion. I shall report. And of course, a lot of this is, as I say, due to your hard campaigning. And Adam Harrison, the lead member, is very keen. I know that.
Yes, and he's got good backup too.
Yeah, I love corrections that no, we did more than that. That's the kind of correction you want to hear.
So yeah, my name is Lucy Marstrand, and I'm a transport planner. And oh, I'm at the end of my presentation. Let's just whiz back up through it. Okay, so yeah, thanks for that, Sally. That was really brilliant, and it's so important, isn't it, to campaign in a way that doesn't kind of rile people and sort of works. So I wanted to talk just a bit about kids and COVID. My kids said, it's got to be kids and COVID, so there we go. But yeah, this is kind of a really important issue. As Sally's alluded to, there's lots of kids out there now who previously wouldn't have even been out cycling or walking. And there's also more kind of playing out, more activity in parks. So yeah, I just thought, I mean, I'm at the moment looking at Windsor and Maidenhead, but I'm also trying to sort of mobilise Merton to think more about what they're proposing. And I just wanted to run through, I suppose, a good place to start seems to me to be, if you are campaigning or you know, working in an authority and looking at your borough or authority, a good place to start is to work out what do you need to do in terms of the public transport displacement onto the road network. So for example, in Merton, I've worked out that if public transport decreases to 10%, we're going to have another 100,000 trips roughly every day that need to be accommodated on the road network. The other thing to not forget is children. So secondary school children across the UK, about 30% get to school normally by bus. So obviously that's going to have a massive impact on their lives and the way they get about. If they can't get to school by bus, they're going to have some other way of getting to school. And then obviously we know these factors from before. So pre-COVID, 42% of trips were less than 2 miles, were done by car. Sorry, let me start again. So pre-COVID, 42% of trips are less than 2 miles and 67% are less than 5 miles. So obviously lots of potential for less driving. This in a way is my favourite slide, because it tells us so clearly that getting people into cars is just a ludicrous thing to do, particularly in urban areas where space is so limited. And it's not just the moving of the vehicles. So there you've got 2,000 people per hour who can be moved on this 3.5 metre wide space. But what do you do with all those cars when they get into a city centre? And pedestrian and cycle traffic just makes much more sense. It would be nice to see an updated version of this with the COVID dimensions in terms of space, but I'm sure somebody will do that. So yeah, just the capacity by mode. From 2014, I did a design tour there, so many years ago now really, and the municipal leader of Copenhagen said, where there's too much congestion, we create cycle facilities. So they really understood that you know, the importance of reallocating space, repurposing space. And now a similar sentiment from Sadiq Khan, suppressing motorised traffic while allowing essential journeys. Very often in transport planning, we measure and fund and plan and design really well for commuting, and traditionally that's been particularly commuting by car or train actually. But the other trips have been rather forgotten. So if you're looking at, you know, kids going to school, shopping trips, that sort of thing, the DFT doesn't really even kind of measure those in the transport appraisal. So I think that's going to have to shift, particularly because, well, you know, with homeworking, maybe the commute's going to become even less important. But also we really need to begin to think about these other trips. And there's a couple of reasons why we need to begin to think about them, partly just for equality. You know, not everyone's commuting. As you get older, you're doing different types of trips. If you've got kids, you know, you'll have this added responsibility of travelling with children. And if we don't think about those trips, we don't provide for them. When you're looking at things like, I've combined their escort education with other types of escorting trips. So that might be taking kids to an activity, taking an elderly relative to hospital. But those escort trips actually constitute more than the commute. That's 17% there, assuming there's a reduction in commuting. So they're really important, but you have to get the conditions right. But they are often very cyclable in terms of distance. So often trips to the shop, trips to the school are likely to be quite short trips, so conducive to walking and cycling. Everyone probably on this call will have seen this before, but just in case, you know, we don't have a good track record in terms of kilometres and injury rates compared to other countries. And unfortunately that, you know, I don't know whether you can see this graph on the left, the proportion there, so that's 0 to 50. And here, because in the UK we cycle so little, we've had to kind of scale it up. So that was 0 to 3. But yeah, just much lower cycling rates for both men and women and across all ages. So 60-year-olds in the Netherlands are much more likely to be cycling, 50 times more likely to be cycling than a 60-year-old Dutch woman in the UK. Yeah, so the main reason people will continue to accompany children is that they're afraid of traffic. We know lots of kids want to cycle to school, but only 2% do so. And traffic remains the leading cause of death for kids aged 5 to 19. And the other thing, I think this is important when you're planning your network, is just thinking about deprived wards. Children in deprived wards are 4 times more likely to be hit by a car. So when you're planning your routes, do have a look at those, particularly the main roads running through deprived areas, but also quieter roads where you might have kids playing out, they might not have gardens. So those streets become more important as play spaces. This again, just from Merton, because I've been looking at it. This is fairly typical actually of an outer London borough, but you can see there that huge inequality. So 10 to 14-year-olds much more likely to be injured as pedestrians. I think the government really should take a much stronger line on car usage and make clear to people that driving is linked to increased mortality risk for things like COVID. It has a serious impact on babies' health, as the BMJ have pointed out. Yeah, so I personally think they should and take a much stronger line in that way and make clear the links. It's a bit like smoking. You know, we had a really good public health campaign about smoking. We need the same for driving. This is really interesting, I think. British children are more likely to be killed than French or Dutch kids, but they spend less time in traffic and they cross the roads less frequently, i.e. our roads are worse in terms of the way they're designed. Yeah, so older pedestrians are overrepresented in accidents at intersections and particularly on multi-lane roads. So there's these kind of big inequalities in our system. And I just put this kind of question about, we often talk about road users being vulnerable, but when you look at these kids here playing out in the street, there's nothing vulnerable about them. We make them vulnerable, we endanger them. We put motorised traffic down the street. So I just kind of raise that as an issue because I think we can get a bit lazy talking about vulnerable road users. This is, I took about a week ago. It's a road near me in Wimbledon. And probably a lot of people, I think Sally had quite a few photographs of this kind of thing before. Lots of people out cycling. But what was really interesting is I was cycling along and there's actually one family here. And we've got 3 of them here. So that's the mum with 2 kids. And then the dad is over here. And that really tells us a lot about the environment. So the mum with the 2 kids, she was communicating with the dad. They were kind of talking to each other as they were going along, but she didn't feel comfortable, even on this road, which is much less traffic than normal. She wasn't prepared to cycle on it with small children, but he was. So different people need different environments. A lot of places have very high cycling potential, but obviously, as I say, we need to provide the right environment. Typically, if you've got kids, you're going to need protected infrastructure. And this is really my favourite tool at the moment. This is the propensity to cycle tool, or it's an extract from it. So the DFT funded this brilliant bit of magic. If you haven't been on there, go onto the PCT, www.pct. It has 2 layers in terms of, so there's stuff that you can analyse potential for cycling to work, and this is potential for cycling to school. And this is really a kind of gold mine of information. So you can see here on these nice dark blue routes, really high cycling potential. So this is Merton, so the darker areas have got over 50% cycling potential. Really massive potential. And this is kind of going back to the point that Sally made about, you know, we're often really stuck with the status quo. It weighs really heavy, but it feels in a way like with COVID, it's sort of been lifted off our shoulders. But this is another tool to kind of help you imagine how things could be. So in terms of design, so governments, you'll be familiar with this now, but governments told us to make significant changes to road layouts. And they've identified, quite a few different ways to shape the environment. And I just wanted to point out the ones that I think are most important, particularly for cycling with children, or in a way enabling children to be independent. So pop-up cycle facilities, if we don't protect routes, they won't work for everyone. That's something we know and is long established. And the other thing, I think that if you're a borough and you can only do 2 things, yeah, one of them would be pop-up cycle facilities and the second would be modal filters. It cuts rat running, it's cheap, easy to implement, and frankly, if it doesn't work, you can always take it out. So it's a very easy, quick thing to do. But the key thing is it allows kids to cycle or walk from their home safely to another place. So modal filters on residential roads, I think, should be kind of standard practice really in boroughs. 20-mile-an-hour limits, people often kind of go towards those, and they do have a place, but the evidence tells us that it doesn't kind of bring about significant change in terms of walking and cycling. So it might make you feel safer, there's a slight reduction in casualties, but it doesn't have the same impact. And the other thing I just wanted to talk about, when we're thinking of creating corridors for buses and cycles, those are really important, but not that many people are going to feel comfortable necessarily cycling with buses. And there's an assumption with bus routes in London that motorcycles are going to be using them. And if you haven't been to it already, I would definitely recommend looking at this reference here, which is about risk posed. So motorcycles cause more pedestrian casualties than any other mode per kilometre. So it's really worth having a look at that. So I would just kind of have a think, buses, motorcycles and kids on bicycles don't mix well. Yeah, you don't have to consult. So I would encourage councils to be brave and try things out and listen to the people who want change. It's just a planter, you can always move it, you can always, you know, change it, it's not the end of the world. And yeah, if you're wanting to get your council to do something, there is, someone's already mentioned this, but Mums for Lungs have put in a filtered street template, so to make it easy for you to ask your council. The guidance that's going to be coming out from government is, well, hopefully, LTN 120 states that if you're cycling on a road with any more than 200 vehicles per hour, it's not going to be suitable for everybody. So yeah, it's just worth bearing that in mind. You know, modal filters really address that so nicely. Unfortunately, in this country, we don't have appropriate signage, I don't think. So a lot of young children are not, you know, 20 miles an hour is too fast. 20 kilometers an hour is okay for them. They can, gives them more time to judge speeds and move out of the way, and for car drivers to do the same. So yeah, kids have a disadvantage when they're on the roads. They can't negotiate with adults in the same way, and they can't judge speeds in the same way. So they need, I think if we're going to create streets that humans can live in, including small humans, we really need to push DFT to produce signage which is less than 20 miles an hour. So 12 miles an hour would be appropriate for a street with children living on it who are going to come out and play on that street. And we also don't have this really nice sign which is so widely used in the continent, where you've got clear priority there for pedestrians. That's this sign here. So it'd be good if DFT could kind of use this time to produce some new signs and legislation. Yeah, playing out, brilliant little, really, really good initiative there. It's worth, again, having a look at that. But yeah, the basic message, I suppose, is we need to make streets suitable for play. Kids are going to carry on being kids through the ages, so we need to change the way we design things. School streets, again, you know, put in a filter and then have a camera enforcement if it's London Borough, very easy to do. You can paint it later on if you want to make it more permanent. We've seen all of these images before, but yeah, rapid measures, easy to put in. And yeah, one thing I wanted to talk about is just, we've got lots of roads in London and across the UK where I think we really need to think about the space and repurposing in a major way traffic lanes on some of these roads, and making that point that it actually could increase capacity, but particularly where you've got people living. This is actually just a road in Redbridge, the A12, massive road, huge numbers of people living there with dirty, polluted air. And I'm sure, you know, if the people who run TfL had to live here, they would be looking at doing something like this. So making it greener, cutting out the traffic. And it's still going to be a 4-lane road, so it's not a tiny road, even if you take 1 lane out each side. The other issue is subways. Obviously, with COVID, we don't really want to be sending people down into subways, so providing at-level crossings is important, even on these main roads. Cycle tracks should be one way, really. So particularly with COVID, we don't want people going near each other, but that's just, again, that's going to be something in the new guidance coming out, which, yeah, Phil Jones is kind of working on. I don't know whether he's in on this call, but yeah, I think the other reason is to avoid two-way tracks is if you're cycling with kids, particularly at commuting times, they become really high-speed environments, and we've seen an increase in head-on collisions. So yeah, they're not the ideal. Again, just think about different types of bikes, cargo bikes, they need more space. And going back to Brian was talking a little while ago about implied zebra crossings, but if you've got a refuge like this, that gives no priority to people. Kids can't negotiate it necessarily. Older people can't get to the refuge if they're slower and have no priority. So just painting in some white stripes at this time would be a good thing to do. And finally, just if you're thinking about your high street in the middle of your town, I really like this example. So this is from Vienna. Looks really quite like a high street near us. And this is what they did with it. So instantly you've got this nice space for people to move around in, kids to play safely, and have some independence. Thank you.
Okay, so hi everyone. Absolutely fantastic to be on the Ideas with Beers. I forget if it's Beers with Ideas, but ideas come first. So that's a good one. Thanks a lot, Brian, for the invite. And I wish I discovered it earlier, because I'm seeing loads of amazing content going down. And I think there's a danger on the academic side that we get too focused on the numbers and the evidence without actually looking around us and seeing what's going on the ground. So I think my talk speaks to some of the topics covered, and there's going to be lots of maps, because I really like maps. If you know me, that's one of three things I really like: maps, bikes, and open source software. So without going too much into the software, I'm going to take you on a journey through building evidence base for transport planning, particularly for active transport, and then moving on to recent work that I've done for prioritizing pop-up cycleways, so-called pop-up cycleways that have a large potential to become long-term. So I am going to try and share my screen, and there we go. So hopefully everyone can see the slide deck here. And the first slide is actually about what you can call opportunities. I fully take Sally's point that just seeing it as an opportunity feels kind of weird at a time of crisis and a huge amount of suffering. But I think at a time of crisis that provides an amazing opportunity to rethink priorities. And this is actually a image that my sister sent me, and she's a yoga teacher, so she was going through really hard times in Australia and had to shut her business essentially. So but the point here is that it may not be seen as an opportunity, but it certainly provides space to think and maybe reprioritize what are our priorities. So I think it is deeper than just saying, oh, this is an opportunity to get more people walking and cycling. It's actually a chance to think about how our entire systems are operating, and the transport system is a key part of that. So this talk in itself is a great opportunity, is a great example of how we can rethink how we're operating. I did a talk in Santiago and Chile a few weeks ago that I don't think would have been, I don't think it would have happened if it wasn't for this coronavirus lockdown and subsequent changes. So the person out there who was teaching transport planning, she had to very quickly change all of her content to be online. And then she said, well, actually, this is an opportunity to get people who I collaborate with who cannot be here in person to do remote lectures. So I think that just shows we are changing our lifestyles. There's no doubt about it. And although a lot of the attention has been on changes to long-term travel, a lot less flying, which is one of the things in this image, there are huge changes to short-term, short distance travel. And you just need to look outside to see way more people are walking and cycling in the local street. So in terms of the slides, I've put together a load of links that are related to this and kind of go through, there's basically two parts to the talk, pre-COVID-19 and post-COVID-19. And there are definitely links between the two. And I'm going to go quite quickly through the pre-COVID-19 stuff. So I was in Sheffield when I was doing my PhD, and I noticed there were some quite good bits of infrastructure. I wouldn't call this image good, but it's certainly a lot better than nothing. It's a contraflow, and I felt more welcome in some places when I was just cycling around, but then other places seemingly randomly had absolutely no provision whatsoever. And I joined that idea with the need for infrastructure in some places with what I was working on at the time, which was basically large-scale geographic data analysis. And I was thinking, well, is there some kind of algorithm to prioritize cycle routes? Where should they build the next cycleway in Sheffield? And it was kind of quite a naive concept, which really focused on routes. So it's the kind of idea that would have flagged up the Leeds-Bradford Cycle Superhighway, which is a flagship cycle investment in the north of England, connecting two major cities. And on paper, it's a really great place to put a cycleway, and I think it is actually an excellent place to put a cycleway. However, it has had some kind of teething problems, and I think at the heart of the issues surrounding it is the fact that it's based on route level thinking. So you think about cycle investment in terms of going from A to B, you need to build a route between A and B. But in reality, we need much more than this. We need networks, and we need to think about cohesion. So that links to the idea that the quality of a cycle network is only as good as the weakest link in that cycle network. And there's actually quite a good, I think, academic paper on this, published back in 2015 that I don't think's had a huge amount of attention, but they're talking about the gradual shift in focus over time from focusing on individual networks to entire networks. Now, that links really well to parallel thinking that was going on and discussions between myself and other amazing researchers based at the University of Cambridge, Westminster, and London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, which essentially led to the Propensity to Cycle tool, which was mentioned earlier, which is a multi-university project for basically imagining how the future could be different in terms of cycling. And yeah, I think digital technology has huge potential here to support decision making. The Propensity to Cycle tool at a very high level allows you to see what the future could be like if we take a different path. And for that reason, on the front page, we are talking big. So it's a national scale tool. And you can simply, with just a click of a button, imagine what it could look like if we got to Dutch levels of cycling in the UK. So that's useful from a kind of high level imagination perspective. But what would happen? What does that mean on the ground? So I've got a very quick example here from Manchester. This is the starting point of the Propensity to Cycle tool. It just shows the best available data that we have on current cycling patterns at quite high spatial resolution. So these are administrative areas. And we can then, to cut a long story short, we developed a method to that's based on these kind of red straight lines, which are desire lines connecting different parts of the city. And for each one of those, we modeled how many people could cycle, because obviously a trip of 20 miles is not as cyclable as a trip of, let's say, 5 miles. So that's what we have done here. And this just demonstrates the power of technology and data, really, to help imagine not just what would happen on a single route, but many hundreds of routes across the city. So just to clarify, this is showing the top 100 cycle routes in Greater Manchester at the medium super output level. So they're kind of medium-sized geographic areas. Each one contains a few thousand people. And what's very interesting, one of the things that I've picked up on is that if we get high uptake in cycling, it definitely does not mean that everyone's going to be out cycling miles and miles. In fact, one of the big changes that happens if we get to a higher cycling world is that the average cycle trip distance to work certainly will reduce. And this just shows that lots of small trips taking place and the spatial distribution of the cycling that's happening totally changes. So that's something that we need to account for when we're planning. We cannot just use existing cycling data to plan for the future of cycling. We need to use something else. And it's about reaching the people that are not currently cycling. I think people who are not cycling should be at the #1 focus of cycling research that's about trying to get more people cycling. So anyway, the next stage, I guess if you're planning for routes, still on the individual route planning mentality, is to take these routes and to try and find a way between the origin and the destination. So we did this on quite a big scale across the city, and you can see that we now have even more information. So we can know something about that route. Is it a straight line? Like how far does it deviate from a straight line? How hilly is it? And then we can use that information to basically provide what I think is the most useful result in the propensity to cycle tool, which I think Lucy showed an image of this earlier, which is this route network level. And that really contains a powerful transport planning message, which is that you need to plan joined up infrastructure in a joined up way. So you can see here for Manchester city centre, for example, you've got very high flows of cycling coming in, still based on 2011 census data. However, transport patterns change relatively slowly. So I think this is a very good proxy for what could happen if you had mass uptake of cycling across at the city level. And this data set works across all of England and Wales. We hope to develop it for other countries and cities. We haven't yet done it for Scotland because the data is only available currently for England and Wales. So that's a very brief story that goes on to the propensity to cycle tool. But one of the next steps that planners such as Brian Deegan were saying is like, okay, well, that's all very well and good, but what do I build where? And then my response as someone researching this is, well, I'm not an engineer. That's an engineering question. So we built a prototype web tool called the Cycling Infrastructure Prioritisation Toolkit, which takes data from the propensity to cycle tool, but it also takes data about the existing cycle network. And you can see here, this is a representation of roughly of some of the main cycleway existing cycle infrastructure in Greater Manchester. And you can see there's loads of gaps in it. I should say this data is from about 2016, so it's probably slightly out of date by now. But the wider point is it's possible to imagine a way to take both of those to try and at least highlight or provide evidence that can support people who are trying to fill up the gaps to create a joined up network. And in fact, one of my favorite examples of a piece of cycling infrastructure is this one, which is in Torrington Place in London. I've used it many times when I go to London, and one of the things that I like about it is it's just so simple. It's just a great example of road space reallocation. And I think before the term pop-up cycleway came into frequent use due to the COVID-19 crisis, there have been multiple examples of pop-up cycleways. And I think the Torrington Place example, I'm not sure if it's a temporary or probably more likely an experimental traffic regulation order, demonstrates what can happen if you have the imagination and the political support to do something slightly different. And I often contrast the Torrington Place cycleway, which is simply light segregation via these armadillos or orcas, with the Leeds Bradford cycle superhighway. And I don't know the exact numbers, but roughly speaking, the Torrington Place cycleway was about 100 times cheaper per kilometre than the Leeds Bradford cycle superhighway. And again, I don't have the exact numbers, but I wouldn't be surprised if this Torrington Place cycleway has roughly 100 times more use than the Leeds Bradford Leeds cycle superhighway. So it could be that from a cost benefit analysis perspective, which again is flawed, but this has got very, very high benefit cost ratios, even before we start thinking about the importance of physical distancing. So that was all where the story ends, and then we go into the COVID-19 situation. So stuff is happening on the ground, stuff has been happening regardless of any tools. Cycle campaigners and progressive local authorities around the country have just started doing stuff. And I think it was Katrina Swanson who said, well, we just need to start doing stuff and testing things out, regardless that you're never going to have all of the data. And I fully agree with this concept of you need to experiment and try things out, especially with things that don't need to be permanent. And this map provides an example of, I don't know how many there are, but I would say into the hundreds of interventions, large and small, that are responding to the COVID-19 crisis by in various ways. And one of the key ways is the provision of pop-up cycleways, slightly like the example that I showed previously for Torrington Place in Camden. So where do I come into this, and how do I join the dots? So essentially, Cycling UK saw the amazing opportunity for change, and rather the need to provide safe space, especially for key workers who now may not be able to use public transport. There's a real urgency to provide safe infrastructure for them to go on. So we did a small analysis based on the cycling infrastructure prioritization tool for 10 cities around the UK. You can see Manchester here. And all it did, it was a very simple idea. Let's just look at where you have spare lanes near city centres, essentially. And the amazing thing is, you can see here for Manchester, you have these very large roads going quite near to the city centre, and that applies to many UK cities. And I would say that's probably not a good thing, but it means that during times of low traffic, which we still have at the moment, certainly if traffic levels are around about 50% or less, when you have 2 lanes of traffic going in one direction, there is an opportunity for road space reallocation that won't cause dramatic changes to congestion levels, motor traffic congestion levels, and it also doesn't affect the navigable network for cars. In the long term, I think we really do need to think about changing the navigable network for motor vehicles, but in terms of getting quick wins and so-called low-hanging fruit, these one-way lanes demonstrate the huge amount of space that is taken up by motor vehicles, which should not be prioritized anyway, and certainly shouldn't be prioritized during a time of low traffic conditions at a need of urgent need for physical activity, a need for people to be able to get to work when you don't have access to other options such as public transport. So these maps have been used by Cycling UK and others to basically flag where there's spare road capacity to be converted into pop-up cycleways. And moving forward a bit, I think this advice came out after we published that initial data analysis for 10 cities, which from some perspectives is quite revolutionary. I'd say quietly revolutionary, because the Department for Transport has now got statutory guidance on reallocating road space. And certainly in Leeds, this was something that was almost a taboo topic, that you could talk about anything in terms of walking and cycling, but road space reallocation simply wasn't on the table. And that's not from me, that's from talking to people who've worked with local authorities. And as I say, I'm not really an expert in terms of the details of transport policy, but that creates a problem for modelers if you want to model a rapid transition to a world in which we have high levels of walking and cycling. And if I just go back to the cycling infrastructure prioritization toolkit, none of the, am I still sharing my screen, Brian, just to check?
No, you've stopped sharing now.
Okay, whoops, that wasn't supposed to happen.
It was all going so well.
Yeah.
We enjoyed the lecture. I mean, we have run out of time a bit, but I'm going to let you keep going so we can record it.
So to cut to the chase, the SIPT does not include any road space reallocation because that simply wasn't on the table. However, we're in a totally new world now, and this is on the table. So we've continued going with this research into how to prioritize road space and how to think about your roads network when creating new cycle infrastructure is a priority. And this was a piece of work that I did for Transport for Greater Manchester, and it basically just flagged some of the key networks going into the city. In this case, we were lucky because I was given a list of roads to analyze, and we did some analysis in terms of the amount of free space on each of these arterial routes going into the city centre. And I believe this has been used to support the argument for road space reallocation in Greater Manchester. And amazingly, some of this has already started to happen. So I was sent a message earlier today just showing these cones going in on one of the major arterial routes into Manchester. So this is happening. This stuff is actually happening. And I believe that you need much more than just data to support the argument. But if you do have good data and you do have a city scale view of the situation, that can really support good policies. And this is really fresh out of the oven, this almost final slide that I'll show, which is an updated version of the analysis that we did for Manchester that essentially shows where you've got a top ranking of routes in terms of high cycling potential, and also that have spare space, whether that's because the carriageway is wide or because you've got spare lanes on the network, which are highlighted in this turquoise colour, like on Bury Road, for example. And we're exploring methods to roll this out very quickly across England in the first instance, but also more broadly to support an evidence-based prioritisation of new investment into these pop-up cycleways. So that's where we're up to. I think there are limitations to the method. So it doesn't say much, if anything, about where you need to prioritise low traffic neighbourhoods and where you may want to use your filtered permeability interventions. So that's something that we should probably think about in terms of next steps. But it does provide a very good starter for 10. And I think when you think at a city level, getting your arterial routes right and reducing the level of danger on the roads on those key arterial routes has got to be a first step at the moment. So going back all the way back to my first slide, I've got a slide deck with links to all of those pieces of information that I was talking about. And I just want to say huge thanks, Brian, for the opportunity to talk. I'm very happy to take any questions if there are any. So thank you.
Yeah, that was absolutely brilliant. Thanks, Robin. And for anybody, particularly outside of London, that was the full game there. It was worth staying around for the end. I hope you'll all agree.